Okay, we are live. Hello, everyone. Doing another episode of this open research series, this time on the state of ZK rollups. We got as guests my man Luca here, who's becoming a regular, I think, from L2Beat, and Cooper from Variant, previously Aztec and Hedera, a ton of experience in ZK rollup land. So excited to get into it with you guys. Welcome.
Thanks. It's an
Thank you.
honor.
Same.
Of course, of course. So let's start with the basics, just to set the stage. So can one of you walk us through? I mean, maybe this lands in more of Luca's camp from L2B, but can you walk through the different stages of a rollups decentralization, and explain kind of how one transitions to another? And just to kind of preface, like, we'll frame this conversation around these different stages, and then I think within each of those, we can dig into like why they matter for like liveness, safety, censorship resistance, user experience, what have you. But let's use the L2Beat framework as kind of the basis. So Luca, if you can introduce us.
Yeah, so the stages framework are a way to represent milestones for decentralizations. It divides into three stages: stage 0, stage 1, and stage 2, where intuitively stage 0 corresponds to full control of the L2 operators within the system. So the system is fully managed by a multisig or something equivalent. And while stage 2 represents a fully autonomous L2 that is fully governed by the smart contracts. And stage 1 is something in between that kind of represents some power given to the smart contracts and some given to some entities to basically protect the users from bug, at least in principle. But of course, everything that can protect you from bugs can also rug you potentially. We tried to define, we've taken this framework from the initial posts from Vitalik. We tried to refine the requirements to make them a little bit more formal. And for example, there is one very nice article I think that we've written on a semi-formalization of stage 1. What does it mean to give half of the power to the proof system, to the contracts? But basically, what we want to do is to, the goal of stages is to have a way to succinctly represent the stage of decentralization. We have the risk rosette, which shows 5 different dimensions of risks that you can have on a rollup. But at the end, what matters is those risks taken as a whole. And those are represented with the stages framework.
Couldn't find the tab. Okay, so we have these different stages. Let's just kind of pick into, and clearly these stages are supposed to represent like aggregate, like risks, and like migrating through them, means kind of de-risking the system as a whole. So let's peel apart the specific risks and some of their implications and kind of what the state of the industry looks like. So let's go into proposer risk and proposer failure specifically. And by the way, for anybody who isn't familiar with L2Beat that's watching this, which I'm sure most people are, they do a brilliant job. You can just go on, their website and kind of dive into each different project and kind of sift through the different risk and all of that. So like this will be obvious. These terms that we're using map directly to the website. So starting with proposer failure, what does this actually mean? What's the state of things? Like, what does this actually mean? First off, what's the state of things? What can rollups do to mitigate this risk? And what are some of the implications of the failure?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm happy
we
to
can
take a first stab at this one, and Luca can
Yeah.
come in
Absolutely.
Yeah, because
I would say in like just at a high level in layer 2 blockchain architectures, your proposer is whoever's responsible for proposing the next block of transactions. Usually it's, someone taking in transactions from its users, ordering them according to some, priority ordering or some, agreed upon ordering. And it's their job to effectively propose that block on chain as like the next block in its sequence. And so when we talk about proposer failure, we're talking about something that happens, it could be some software bug or some other, externality or external circumstances that causes the proposer to be unable to put those transactions and therefore the next block on chain, kind of proposing it in the next, order. And so this is obviously a really bad problem. Like you can imagine if Ethereum just was unable to propose the next block, the chain would effectively like halt in many ways. And so when we talk about proposer failure, it's kind of like the chain halting, being able to progress. And there's various things that we can do in order to mitigate proposer failures. For instance, you can have different types of ways that individual users can go directly to the contracts and propose the next block. This is sometimes called an escape hatch or direct proposing in some contexts. There's kind of a lot of names for this, but there's ways that users themselves can go directly to the contracts. You also have some types of governance mechanisms where you could actually replace and kind of rotate the proposer to someone else in the event that they are fully offline, unable to respond, or they lost their keys or something like that. I do think L2Beat has some nice green, yellow, and red categorizations. If you could pull up that screen share, and maybe Luca could talk a little bit more about these.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of nuance in what it means to propose a block, because in Ethereum blocks, Ethereum blocks are divided into two sections. You have the block header, which contains within other things also the state root of the block, and then you have the list of transactions. It turns out that you can split these two parts of the blocks within L2s. So you could have certain roles that posts the list of transactions on chain, and then you can have another role that posts the state root, which is a succinct way to represent the result of executing the transaction, so like the after state. In some L2s, this, like in general, it could be that these operators are operated by the same entity, but like it makes sense to distinguish them at least in like mentally. But also there are some systems in which this is not true. So this is a distinction between projects I use. I don't want to go into too much into the details of this, but like you can have sequencers, like we call sequencer those ones that post the transaction data on chain. And we call proposers the ones that post the state root on chain. So the sequencer is the one that posts the inputs, and the proposer is the one that posts the outputs. In chains that use state diffs, they're usually the same role because state diffs are not inputs but are outputs. So they're like tightly coupled with the state root. So it's more difficult to distinguish between them. But in any case, at L2Beat, when we talk about proposer failure, we talk about the entity that proposes the state root. The state root is needed for withdrawals. It's the way that the L2 tells L1 about what happened, if some tokens needs to be reached back, or whatever the activity was on the L2. And to say to L1 what was the final state after executing some transactions, you would need to prove them. You need to prove that the state transition was calculated correctly. So in principle, you need a proof system. If you don't have a proof system in your rollup, proposing state roots is completely trusted. So proposer failure is, as Cooper said, if this operator is down for whatever reason, it being a bug or it being malicious, you need a way for users to propose the state roots themselves, or use the escape hatch, depending on the definitions. But the problem is, if you don't have a proper proof system, either because you don't have one entirely, like we see with many OP stacks that are alive today. Or you have problems within your proof system where, for example, the state transition is non-deterministic, or because your circuit is under constraint and some execution is trusted, and this is the case for Linea today, for example. You cannot allow anyone to propose state roots because proposing is trusted. So the only way for you to really open up proposing state roots to everyone is if the state roots are actually validated by a proof system. So you can see a green proposer failure in those systems that usually have a proof system, and red in those projects that don't. And yellow is this something in between, in which there is a centralized entity that can propose state roots, but there is some decentralized system that can rotate this proposer. And this is the case for zk-sync era today.
I would say that most ZK rollups are probably in this like yellow category right now, right? Is that fair?
So zk-sync era is yellow because there is this governance that they launched recently to rotate the proposer. Polygon zkVM is green because, and that's kind of tricky and kind of overlaps with the discussion on sequencer failure, because there is a centralized sequencer that can propose blocks, but anyone can prove those blocks. So they have an open source prover, and like after this data is posted, anyone can propose. But proposer failure is not enough because you would also need to push yourself the withdrawal transaction if you want to exit. So it's not enough for you to prove things that the sequencer decides. Like you would need to, like to escape, you need to both propose the block and prove the block, right? So you need both slices to be green. So Polygon zkVM is green, Scroll is red, because they cannot prove everything. There was this very nice demo that was done by someone at Neil Foundation, I think, during ETH Denver, where they sent a transaction containing too many ketchups to Scroll network, and you can see this transaction disappear because they have some issues with proving transactions that are too big to fit into the circuit. At least that's how I understand it. So that's why they cannot have forced transactions and proposer, like allow anyone to propose state root. But like once you get more confident, yes, you can easily get to yellow or green.
That makes a lot of sense.
So two questions come to mind around sticking to proposer and proposer failure. What are like, let's map this to like practical risks. And when you have, proposer failure, like what are some of the bad things that can happen? Not even technical, just like situational, like immerse me and the listeners in what can go wrong. And so you could take it down that route. Alternatively, if this is a more interesting route, what are the incentives to decentralize or to not decentralize? So I know you both have, I think, thought about both of these things, but take it however you want.
Yeah, I'll comment on the first one, which is like, what are the pragmatic, practical user benefits that can happen if these things are not in place? I think that the reality is, even like by accident, to know someone, like without someone's fault, if there's not adequate security measures in place, people can lose money. They could have their money frozen. They could be unable to withdraw their money, and it could just kind of be stuck there for literally forever, actually, in some cases. And people need to know that. And I think that that's one of the things that L2Beat is doing such a wonderful job of educating people on. I think that's kind of one of the reasons that it exists as a public good, as a service. So like on one end of the spectrum, the worst thing is like your money is stuck there forever. I think that there's like, a spectrum of how much this can impact you. And I think it's very similar to like hard versus soft censorship in a lot of ways. Hard censorship is your money is stuck there forever. You could imagine another scenario where I have a loan or something that's about to get liquidated on chain. So I'm doing some type of timely activity and I want to get my transaction in. Unfortunately, the proposer is not working. And so I have to do an escape hatch or a forced exit of some kind. And typically, you, as Luca mentioned, have to have the ability to generate these proofs. You have to have, a lot of resources, either sophisticated knowledge or just computationally. And then let's say I managed to figure out how to get my transaction into the escape hatch. Usually those things have most likely a 24-hour delay for inclusion. And so in the event that my transaction is a timely transaction, there's a good chance that I might not be able to use the escape hatch in a timely sense that matters to me. And so there's a practical reality that some users could get liquidated. You'll get a lot of market inefficiencies, and overall just kind of like a bad user experience in the event that you want to use these things. So I think that that's kind of the more pragmatic end of the spectrum. I think it's unlikely that we see major projects outright, censoring people or being, I don't know how you would say, sufficiently incompetent to lose people's money, but more so that people just have bad user experiences and it impacts what they end up wanting to do on chain. Yeah.
Yeah, so one worthy mention is DYDX V3. So they're shutting down their StarkX system, which was a rollup on Ethereum, because they built this separate chain that is not an Ethereum L2 anymore. So they want to sunset their previous system. They want to stop the operator from producing blocks and proposing state roots. So, like in the naive way, this would freeze all the funds that are in DYDX. This will happen like in a few days, and there are more than $100 million in the project. But fortunately, StarkX, the StarkX stack that was developed by Starkware, has indeed an escape hatch. So even if the operator is down, all the users can exit like indefinitely, even if they plan to exit like in, I don't know, 100 years. They could, because Ethereum provides the security to like prove these transitions, prove the withdrawals, and prove the exit trustlessly.
It's interesting. Yeah, I think these systems are obviously very complex, and there's like clearly a lot of edge cases for each of these. Like, oh, anybody can propose it, but wait a minute, not everybody has the resources, and oh, wait, you could do escape hatch, but up too slow. Like, there's just a lot to consider. Do you how about the incentives part of it? So we'll step through some of the same questions for sequencers as well, but like for proposers specifically, like are there incentives to decentralize or to not decentralize? Like, can you walk me through the psychology there?
I think the reality is a lot of people are incentivized to not decentralize their proposers because they're scared of the integrity and security of their proof systems. By whitelisting it or permissioning it or restricting access, it is inherently a much safer environment, especially for these proof systems that aren't mature yet, that have come out in the past 12 months. In reality, it's a security trade-off in a lot of ways that teams are compromising on. So I think that they're incentivized to kind of somewhat centralize the system until they have sufficient confidence in the system, and we'll see them kind of take off the training wheels over time, as indicated by the frameworks. And I think that you're seeing that with a lot of these projects moving from stage 0 to stage 1, and potentially, like, we'll see, I think, probably some stage 2 zero knowledge rollups at some point, hopefully in the next 12 months, but we'll see what happens there. I also think that the importance of that is somewhat mitigated with the adoption of multi-proof systems and some of these alternative things that are mitigating the risks that there are vulnerabilities in your verifying contracts or in your proof systems themselves. So as things like people implement these TEE-based multi-provers or other alternatives, I think we'll see more people take off the training wheels, specifically as it comes to proposers. Yeah, I'm curious, Luca's take.
Yeah, so I agree with everything that Cooper said. When you open up proposing to everyone, it opens up also more attack surface, because like your proposer, your operator will always like execute things like honestly, hopefully. But when you open up proposing, it could be that the proposer crafts like the proof in a way that really tries to exploit maybe one something in your circuit that is wrong, right? So you should be really confident in your proof system before opening up proposal. This is crucial. But also there are ways to mitigate this. One way is multi-proofs. This is something like very complex. Maybe you can do this with TEs. Maybe like you need to build another proof system from scratch. But there are also ways to mitigate this issue before multi-proofs. And this is an approach that Zix and Kira has took, which is when you post the state root on L1, there is an additional 21 hours in which you cannot act on the state root. Like you cannot withdraw using the state root. You wait these 21 hours in which like the Security Council can act to check that indeed the proof was correct and we're not like going against some invariance or whatever in your system. So adding these execution delays, as you can call it, which is kind of similar to the challenge period in optimistic rollup, to like have the time to check that indeed the proof was correct and nothing was exploited.
Do you think that that's a model that we'll see be repeated elsewhere, Luca? Like, do you think that that is palatable to people?
I think it makes sense. Like this is also the reason why Optimism had the seven days challenge period even before for proofs. And the reason why optimistic rollups, like all the OP stacks, have this challenge period even for proofs, because let's say that there is a fault in your proposer and something wrong is proposed, like you want to have some time to react. So I think it's totally reasonable. I know that Arbitrum, when they will deploy Bold, which is their new proof system, they will also have something similar, some period of time to react if something is wrong, because like Bold is an entirely new proof system that is not well tested as the current one. So I think it's a nice approach.
It sounded like you're a little bit skeptical over multi-prover implementations. I'm curious your take. Do you think that we'll see actual like either TE-based proofs or other things, or do you not think that that's like?
So my take is that it's super complex to build one proof system already. Building two is it makes sense to use TEs if you use them as a 2 out of 2 type of thing.
Yeah, it's like an alternative, I guess, to a multi-proof system is how I see it in my head.
Yeah, I mean, if you use a TE in the sense that you require both the TE and the ZK proof to agree on something, I think that's fine. Using them as a 1 out of 2 is less, more problematic in a way. But yeah, I mean, when you have multi-proofs, you could have, in principle, ZK proof, a TE that, even if, the Intel is malicious or want to screw you up, you have a ZK proof that can protect you in a way. And in a case of equivocation, because there is a bug in the ZK proof, or because Intel is malicious, as there is a bug in the TE itself, you can have, the Security Council, for example, decide which one of the two state roots that are contradictory to accept.
Does that like mental model of having a zero knowledge proving system running alongside a TE and like a 2 of 2, as you mentioned, where does that fit into the stages of rollups? Like, is that?
Yeah. So this is something that makes sense when you're in stage 2, because the difference between stage 1 and stage 2 is that in stage 1, you have a Security Council that can promptly act whenever a bug is present. You don't need to prove that there is a bug. Like you could just, detect off-chain that a bug is there, and which means that at any time the Security Council has instant upgrade power to protect you from bugs. But again, having instant upgrade powers also open up from attacks from the Security Council. You can have like either the Security Council being straight up malicious, or being bribed, or being forced to do something. When you have a stage 2 system, the only way you can protect you from bugs is if you prove them on chain. So you need to prove that the state transition was wrong. But how can you prove the state transition wrong if it's the proof system itself that decides what is correct or not? The way to do this is you need some redundancy. You need multiple proof systems that hopefully are always aligned. But if they disagree, it means that either there is a bug, either there is something non-deterministic, And this is the only way to actually prove false on chain. You could also, in principle, prove within one, but you cannot cover all the problems. So like Polygon ZKVM today, if you can prove two different state roots within that correspond to the same blocks, they activate an emergency state, which means that the state transition is not deterministic. Like it produces two states within the same batches. But like to cover all the bugs, you need at least two per systems, two different implementations.
It's really interesting. And I just, from my perspective, I feel like the TEE-based solution is simpler and computationally much cheaper. So I'm sure that we'll see that. I can't imagine that we'll ever see a world where we have people actually implementing two side-by-side actual full zero knowledge verifiers. That just does, like, I assume you agree with me. That just doesn't seem practical.
Yeah, I totally agree. I know already a few ZK rollups that are planning to use TEs alongside the ZK proof system. Building one from scratch, as I said, I don't see this happening. Maybe it will be possible with these risk zero, SP1 type of provers. But like building a whole circuit from scratch, yeah, I mean, that's tough.
I was actually going to ask if that's how you saw it playing out. Like we were talking to Toggle last week, and I was like, oh, like how many different provers together like is optimal? And he's like, oh, like 3. But clearly, it doesn't make sense to build 3 yourself. So like, how do you see these like cross pollinating like with the SP1s, and like I clearly know who's going to build and maintain like 2 or 3 of these themselves. But like, how do you actually see it playing out?
Well, I mean, maybe what Toggle, like my proposal, I think it makes sense to have 3 in the sense that you might want to not stop in the case there is a failure in one, in the sense that you could have a 2 out of 3, in which there is a majority that if the majority agrees on something, you can still chug along, and in the meantime decide to upgrade the one that is faulty, because you can prove on chain that there was one that was disagreeing with other 2. So like you can probably decide to turn off that one, continue to chug along with 2 that can still protect you from bugs, and in the meantime upgrade to the 3rd one. So I think this is a very safe approach. I think it makes sense. But still, I hope that we see some cross-pollination of ways to build these ZK proofs. Maybe I don't know if having ZK proof with 2 TEs makes sense. Maybe it does. I'm not sure. But like, definitely it's something that we need to explore more in the ecosystem.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, what do you think the 3, like we talk about 3 proof systems, like what are the 3? Is it like you have a zero knowledge verifier, you have a TE, you have like a small BLS consensus network attesting to the validity of the state transition too? Like what do you imagine the 3 being when we say 3?
Yeah, I mean, it could be anything. I for sure imagine ZK proofs and TEs, but the 3rd one maybe
That's
makes
like
sense to use.
That's the secret sauce.
Yeah, that's the secret thing. Yeah. So to be honest, I'm not sure. Like, I would maybe make sense to have some governance as the 3rd one. Maybe it makes sense to have something that is being compiled. So like you have your state transition written in Rust, and you prove it with let's say risk 0, just to name one. But also like it opens up to efficiency, because it could be that one system is really optimized to be like a type 1 ZKVM. So yeah.
That makes sense. That's interesting. I haven't really thought about what the 3rd one would be, and it's a good question.
I think governance is actually pretty interesting to throw in there as like as a 3rd, at least for the foreseeable future. And okay, so I want to make sure we get to sequencers a little bit, so maybe we can shift gears to that. Can you, Luca, can you orient us around like, not like what is a sequencer, but maybe we can go past that. But what are some of the kind of failure modes and of sequencers? And then Cooper, maybe you can like also shed light on just like the practical implications of censorship and like what can go wrong when there is a failure.
So there are two main problems regarding ZK rollups when we talk about sequencer failures, which is like those two things are the main ones that prevents projects to have green sequencer failure slice. And those two things are that when you post your transactions on L1, the proposer or like the prover is forced to process those transactions. Like it cannot skip them. There are some cases in which like there are some chains, some L2s that can skip transactions that arrive from L1, which we usually call forced transactions. So like if they can be skipped, they're not really forced in a way. An example of this is scroll. Scroll has a queue on L1 where you're supposed to push transactions on the L2. So like you can force the proposer to process your transaction, but what they have is what they call in the smart contract skipped bitmap, something like this, where basically the proposer can say, I want to skip this transaction, I will not process it, and this will be an input to the proof system that will allow the prover to actually skip. Even if the data is there, even if it has to be proved, there is this freedom to the prover to skip certain transactions. And the reason behind this is that, as I said before, there are certain transactions that these circuits cannot prove. And this is the case for both scroll and Polygon ZKVM, which are the ones that are more like have discussed this openly, these issues openly. So the first one is, let's take again the example of the transaction with too many ketchups. If you want to push a transaction that has too many ketchups in scroll that is within the EVM gas limit, so like in principle, this transaction fits in the EVM, like L2, the scroll EVM gas limit, but it doesn't fit in the prover. Like the prover cannot create the proper witness that fits in the circuit. So what they do is that they need to censor this transaction because they cannot prove them. So that's a limitation. Another limitation that is present in like Polygon ZKVM. So these systems, like you have two ways in which you could implement forced transactions. The first one is transactions are like you can only push one transaction individually. So let's say you want to call a contract, you are censored from the L2. You send the specific transaction with the call data that you need through L1, and you kind of force the system to process it. The other way is to yourself propose a whole block that contains many transactions. So like you essentially act as a sequencer yourself. And usually blocks from these ZK rollups are compressed. The post compressed data, because in this way you can fit more data. But if you use compressed data in the circuit, you need to like prove the compression because you need to check that indeed what you posted corresponds to the actual witness that you use in the prover. But if you open sequencing to everyone, it could be that someone just posts random data because like you cannot really on L1 recognize if something is random data, like garbage data or something or compressed data. But it could be that if someone posts garbage data, you cannot generate a proof that this block is invalid, because usually ZK proofs only prove valid things, not invalid things. Like you need explicit support for proving invalid things. So this is the issue that Polygon ZKVM has right now. They cannot open up forced transactions. Like they have a flag to enable forced transaction. It is not enabled because if they did so, anyone could post a block containing garbage data that would halt the system completely, because the prover cannot generate a proof for that block. Like it cannot prove that the block is garbage, basically. So they're trying, like with one of the next upgrades, to what they call the prove anything model, which basically is for any piece of data, they can say whether it is a valid and then prove it, or if it is invalid and then prove it that it is invalid, so that they need to skip this piece of data. So the two as I said, the two problems are, first, you need to be able to prove everything that you're supposed to fit within blocks. And this is usually a resource issue, or like a pricing issue. Like if you can tweak pricing, let's say over the KCHA code to be more pricey, you can like prove that too many KCHAs are over the EVM gas limit. That's easier to prove. Or the way that Polygon zkVM solves this issue is with two gas limits. Like the first one is the gas limit of the EVM itself, and the second one is what they call zk gas, which is basically a gas limit for the circuit. So there is a gas limit for the EVM, a zk gas limit for the circuit. If you go over both, your transaction revert, and like they can prove. But this is much complex because within the proof you need to calculate the complexity of the proof itself. So like it's a bit recursive. So like it's a bit complex. And that's the main reason why most of the projects don't have a green sequencer failure. The only one that is better than red is zkSync ERA, because they have a queue on one. Everyone can post transactions in the queue. The proposer is forced to process the transactions in order. It cannot skip anything, but it can decide to skip the entire queue. It can decide, not to process anything. Like it cannot cherry pick, but it can censor everyone, which would also censor all the deposits. So like this is something that you would really notice if it happens. And apparently, I think they're the only one that can prove everything already.
I think that this is a good example of how much more difficult in certain like very specific things it is to build a ZK rollup than an optimistic rollup, especially if you wanted to like let anyone propose block contents. At Aztec, we were like, Aztec basically blocks are client-side generated zero-knowledge proofs. So you actually not only need the proofs, but you need the data behind the proofs to be available in order to sequence the block. And so you have this like really nasty, like call it a client-side proof withholding attack or a client-side transaction data withholding attack or whatever you want to call it. But at least in Aztec's designs, it was a really nasty problem that we spent a lot of time thinking about. I also think that this problem that Luca articulated is also why it's easier to build based optimistic rollups than based zero knowledge rollups. The same problem, like the whole idea of base sequencing is you have anyone permissionlessly able to include the next L2 block as part of the L1 block. And so you run into this problem of like, how do you guarantee that that block can be proven or have some type of fork choice rule over the blocks that are being sequenced? And so I do think that this is kind of like a good example of some of the nuances. Like we came to market and zero knowledge virtual machines actually developed much faster than we originally anticipated potentially. Took a little bit longer to develop fraud proofs, but now we're teasing out some of these like kind of other hard problems about the design space. And I think that like, again, going back to the concrete things that happen in the event of a sequencer failure, it's the same spectrum of, hard to soft censorship. Like if you can't include the next, transactions in a block, like you could have all your money frozen forever. Or on the other hand, it could take you long enough to get included into a block or have governance rotate the sequencer or something else that you could potentially get liquidated or have other like actual real world consequences. And so these are like very important, problems to solve. In general, yeah. And I think, Luca, I'm curious your take, but in my head, I don't know if like, let's say shared sequencing as a category solves these hard problems. I'm curious your perspective.
So usually the way that like optimistic because optimistic, as you said, it's easier to build optimistic rollups that allow for transactions. And the way that these rollups work is that you have a first transaction mechanism on one, and there are some delays. Because they have a centralized sequencer. The centralized sequencer gives preconfirmations, and you don't want a first transaction that invalidates preconfirmations. Because it could be that you give a preconfirmation of a block that we will post like in 10 minutes. Someone sends a first transaction that is supposed to be inserted at that specific moment. If you don't have delays, which means that it could touch some state that you pre-confirmed, and so you would invalidate this pre-confirmation. So Arbitrum has this 24 hours of delay before transactions, so that the sequencer can take its time to decide where to put it. In Optimism, it's slightly different, but the result is the same. If you open up sequencer decentralization, either with a separate consensus or with base sequencing, then you, in principle, don't have these delays. Like, you don't need them because by design, your system handles like transaction inserted by other proposers that are before you, or maybe like you need to give a lock to the next like base proposer in the look ahead. Like, there are many designs here on how to do this with different trade-offs with real-time censorship resistance or real-time liveness, or anyway, like timeliness guarantees. But yeah, I mean, the main reason why you would prefer to decentralize the sequencer instead of implementing first transactions is to prevent these delays. Like, as I said, if I'm being liquidated, I want my transaction to be included as soon as possible. I don't want to go to first transactions. I would prefer maybe to wait a few seconds for the sequencer to rotate so that it can include my transaction.
That makes a lot of sense. I think that maybe it's a good time to transition to maybe talking about like upgrades, Donnoh, if you think that's a good next conversation here.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, so
I guess I like have a take that all of your other mechanisms are only as secure as your upgrade mechanism.
Yes.
Basically, like the TLDR is if your governance can, modify the actual escape hatch, the proposer contract, literally anything else. It doesn't really matter. You could assume that there's an escape hatch that lets you use it, but if governance can remove that overnight without, any withdrawal delays or otherwise, it's kind of a moot point. So I actually think that like the upgradability is probably the most important one. I also feel like it's going to be the last one potentially to be removed. I'm curious your take there, Luca.
But it actually goes both ways, because at L2Bit, what we call today an exit window, before it was called upgradability, and this slice was taking into account upgrade delays initially. But we've noticed that within some designs, it's not enough to have an upgrade delay. And the reason is, so let's say that the operators or like whatever governance or multisig that is there wants to push a malicious upgrade to steal everything that is in the bridge. You should be able to exit before this happens. So like, yes, you need upgrade delays. You need to provide an exit window for users to exit if they disagree. Like, it could be a malicious upgrade, or it could be something maybe not malicious but controversial. Let's say that a chain decides to enable KYC to every deposit or every transaction. It could be that you want to exit from the system. You should be able to do so within some time. Like, you shouldn't pretend users to be online every second to exit in time. So like, you need to at least provide, what we say, 7 days to be yellow, or 30 days. But the thing is, you need to be able to escape independently and trustlessly. So, because it could be, and I can give you a very concrete example, and this example is Polygon ZKVM. So in Polygon ZKVM, for upgrades, they have a 10 days time lock. Okay, so like, you could think that you have around 10 days to escape from the system. But if the operators are malicious, since sequencer failure is red, in the sense that you cannot force transactions, if they want to push a malicious upgrade and they're censoring your exit, it doesn't matter that they have a 10 days delay. You cannot exit. Like, instead of being rugged today, you will be rugged in 10 days, and you cannot do anything. So to have something better than a red exit window, like to provide your users with an exit window, you at least need a green sequencer failure and a green proposer failure, which means your user should be able to force transactions within your system and prove the transactions themselves autonomously. And now, if your users can exit without your help, whether you're censoring their exits, you should be able to provide them with some time. So let's take again Polygon as the KVM example. So as I said before, they have a forced transaction flag that is disabled right now, but let's say that it is enabled. If you go look at their delays, because as we said, usually in forced transaction mechanism, there are delays. And in Polygon ZKVM, there are 5 days of delay to force a transaction. Then there are an additional 5 days of delay to prove the transaction. And then there are an additional 5 days of delay to make that state root that you've proven executable, like actionable. So like in total, if you need to exit independently, and if forced transaction were to be enabled, you would need 15 days to exit. But the upgrade delay is 10 days. Like, you don't have enough time to perform all of this action, even if you act as fast as possible, because of all of these delays. So the exit window is basically the upgrade delay that you have minus all the delays that you put on users to exit independently. So in this case, in Polygon ZKVM, it would be 10 days of upgrade delays minus 15 days, which is 0. So right now, Polygon ZKVM has a 0 exit window.
Just wait until you have a bunch of layer 3s that you have to consider their exit windows for as well. That just
exactly
way more fun.
Yes. Yeah, it gets a lot worse with L3s. Like, delays adds up when you want to, force from L1 to L3. Like, it's super messy. But also, like, some projects are trying to mitigate these for L3s as well.
You guys will need a separate site and team, L3 Beat. That sounds like a big beast. So in the interest of time, there's definitely way more rabbit holes we can go down, but in the interest of time, let's actually start to wrap up. Last week we did a rapid fire series of questions, which I think ended up pretty fun. So if that's cool, we'll do the same thing now, and then we'll get going. How's that?
Yep.
All right. These are gonna be yes, no, and last week we were like literally not able to stay with yes, no, and it was pretty funny, but we'll try. So first off, and we'll go Luca, then Cooper, and so first off, is decentralization overrated for rollups?
No.
Okay, thought that might be an easy one to warm up. Are validiums and optimiums L2s?
That's the opposite of easy. I remember that the last time I said no, but I think I lost the battle, and I say yes.
I'm going to say yes.
You and I were arguing. I remember there was several.
I lost the battle, but not the war, because I think it's okay to say that the systems are L2s. Like, it's okay, whatever label you want to put them. What matters is like the risks, and like we have some very nice things that we will release very soon on L2Bit to actually analyze even deeper the risks of using LDAs.
Yeah, if those things aren't L2s, no one tell the Bitcoin people.
Yeah, that's a whole nother discussion. Yeah, I was making the case, Luca, in the past that validiums were L2s and optimiums weren't, but I think you had some really good rebuttals on why they're actually more similar.
It was very nice to see that Dankrad in the previous one presented the case in which a validium can steal funds as well using ransoms, And I'm happy to say that I actually managed to convince him, because I presented this argument to him during Berlin a few months ago. And yes, you can steal from a Validium.
Nice. Yeah, you made some good cases. Okay, is Ethereum's role as a DA layer at risk with the rise of alt DAs?
Absolutely not.
I'm gonna say yes.
Ooh, damn! This is gonna be hard to stick the yes or no, but we will. Okay. Will rollups ever till next time? Will rollups ever remove multisigs completely?
I don't think so.
Are you asking if all rollups or some rollups?
Yeah, I get that. That was most.
No.
I don't think so. Like, we will see some, rollups in which like their marketing will be like, we're fully not upgradable, totally trustless, and whatever. But like Ethereum upgrades. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I know that Aztec has because I think there are also some risks in Aztec if you have keys. Like, since you're handling private state, it's better for you maybe not to have any keys in the system, like legally speaking. But like Ethereum upgrades, so I don't see why L2s shouldn't upgrade as well. Maybe will be like super long delays, but like I don't see like Bitcoin style immutability as being very useful. Like, there will be some of them for sure.
I definitely don't think most will. Okay, will optimistic rollups exist in 5 years? And then if so, will they exist in 10 years?
Yes and no. I think there is some value in optimistic rollups in the short, at least in the medium term.
I think that they will exist, but I think like post 5 years, it will be a very questionable architecture decision. Next 1 to 5, totally reasonable.
Like, I can give you the argument on why I think optimistic rollups could still exist. And the thing is, if you think about bisection games in the for-proof system, let's say that you pick the fastest prover that is on the market, like the fastest one, the one that has the highest throughput. If you add 1 step of bisection in the proof system, you could have an L2 that has double the throughput of a, like, the way that you do this is, instead of proving everything, you only prove half of the computation after 1 step of bisection, like they do in optimistic rollups. So it's super easy for an optimistic rollup to like double or have several times the throughput of the fastest ZK rollup.
We're gonna have to come up with another name for that, because I don't know if I would call that an optimistic rollup.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is that even if you have only 1 step, like 1 bisection, you still need the 7 days. Like, you cannot escape the 7 days challenge period. So that would be the biggest trade-off. But I've spoke with some optimistic rollups that what their idea is literally to take the fastest ZK prover and scale it up like a few times. And they can always do this with optimistic rollups, with the trade-off of the delayed settlement.
All right. We got 1 minute. So is fast finality a meme or is it real?
Meme.
In the way it's
I think it's real.
Okay. I mean, it clearly depends how it's used, but okay. And then finally,
I think memes are real, though. Like, memes are real. Those aren't contradictory.
That's fair. Are stage 3 rollups real?
No, absolutely not.
I think they will be eventually. I think we need to update the stages.
I mean, it depends. Like, the nuance is, if we get the EVM and EVM precompile, maybe we do. Because, it could be that eventually Ethereum will be all ZK proven, and you could have a precompile that verifies a ZK proof within the L1 protocol, because the L1 protocol already generates ZK proofs for the execution. So that every time L1 upgrades, your L2 upgrades automatically, because the precompile gets upgraded, the ZK precompile. So maybe once we're there, it makes sense to say these ones are like significantly more secure. We follow L1 forks, but like, I don't see them anytime soon. Like
I'm gonna build the first stage 3 roll up. Sorry, Fuel. I gotta go, guys. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, I think I was going to say we should wrap. Thank you guys for coming on. This was fun.
Anytime.
Thank you. See you.
All right, see ya.